And we're live. Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on behalf of SAM and University of Dayton Publishing. We're very pleased to have you here with us and sharing this great opportunity to learn and share ideas. We have the great opportunity to have Paula Rebolledo Cortez, and her webinar is going to be about evidence and teaching, Mind the Gap. Paula, she has taught at primary, secondary, undergraduate, and postgraduate levels, and in inset programs in Chile and overseas. Her interests include teacher education, professional development, and teacher research. She has led teacher research initiatives such as the Champion Teachers Program in Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. She's the co-author of the Handbook for Exploratory Action Research and co-founder of RISELT, a local network of Chilean teachers who promote research initiatives in the Chilean context. Paula, she is going to foster her presentation on some questions and statements. For example, as follows: what are your favorite teaching strategies? How do you know if they promote learning? Usually we use certain teaching strategies because we feel they work, but the question is, do they really? In this talk, Paula will invite us to look at findings from general education and applied linguistics research to examine what the evidence tells us about the efficacy of such practices. Before she starts with her presentation, I would like to tell you that during the presentation, Paula will ask you some questions in which you are going to interact with her. You will find an icon at the top right corner of your laptops, of your screens, which is called ME, Menti. So once she mentions the questions, you will have to click on this icon, and then the question will display. So if the options are many, you will have to scroll down, choose the one you choose the one the selected one, and then submit it. Okay? So well, let's give a warm welcome to Paula, and thank you again for joining us. Paula, it's your time now.
Thank you, Yen. I'm going to be absolutely honest with everybody about the situation in which we are right now. We are pretty much innovating with this webinar, which means that we are using a completely different platform that we have all used before. So please bear with us if there are some moments that we need to agree on certain things and coordinate. And because there's going to be a lot going on in the webinar, I'm going to try to provide the presentation in the usual format, which is through PowerPoint, but I would like also to interact with you a little bit to know some of your ideas, opinions, or experiences. And in order to do that, as Yen explained, I'm going to add some questions through a poll using a software called Mentimeter, okay? So when that moment comes, I'm going to let you know, and then you need to provide your choices. So now that we've clarified that, a second clarification is that there is going to be a certain delay from the moment that I'm speaking to the moment that you actually receive the prompt to answer the question. So because of that, every time I ask the question, I'm going to provide like a 20, not 20, that would be too much, like a 10-second gap, so that you have the time to answer the questions, and then you have the time to answer them, and then they could be displayed on screen for all of us to see what is going on, okay? So those are the clarifications, and just welcome you all. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Thank you to all of you there, and thank you for the organizers of this webinar, SM and Dayton University Publishing, for the invitation. We have organized this webinar in conjunction with RISELT. You know that we are a network of people that are very interested in research that has been produced locally and for teachers in Chile. So we wanted to talk a little bit about research, since RISEL promotes research. This is not going to be a webinar about research carried out in Chile. We wanted to talk about research that has been carried out elsewhere that could inform the profession, so that we get to know a little bit about it, okay? So that's a long introduction, so I'm just going to start. The presentation, it's called originally Evidence and Teaching, Mind the Gap. And then when I was looking at the slides, I kind of regretted doing that. Teaching should come first and evidence second, even though they are intertwined, but so that we keep in mind that always teaching is going to be our focus. So to move on, why it's that I usually like to talk about this. I've been very interested in this whole connection between teaching and research, and particularly evidence that comes from research, because what usually happens is that I perceive there is this huge gap between those two activities. Evidence that comes from research is usually not connected in any way with the teaching activity. And that is one of the things that I've been pretty much focusing on for the past years, trying to create a more coherent and a more, I don't know, if we would like to call it in a way, a more established and long-established relationship between these two areas. So I would like first to start by looking at what, in fact, it is that you do when you think about the sources that inform your teaching decisions. So this is the key question, which is the first question that we are going to start with now. What is the source of your teaching strategies? Is it experience from the classroom? Is it evidence from research that you found out from somewhere? Is it discussions that you have with colleagues? Is it internet by just checking online? Or is it workshop and conferences? So what is going to happen now is that they are going to display the questions on Menti. So what you need to do is to click on Menti, and the questions will be displayed, and you need to vote for what you think is the most common source of knowledge for you to make decisions about your teaching, okay? So I'm going to leave you time for you to check on the Menti and then start answering the question. Okay, now I can see already some of your answers. I'm going to give to some of you a couple of more seconds to answer that question, but I think there is a clear indication of where most of the answers are. Thank you. Thank you for making the screen bigger for those of us who are a little bit senior at this stage. Okay, thank you. I think that gives us a clear indication of where the answers are. It seems to be based on you that most of the decisions that you make in your classroom come from classroom experience. And there is no surprise there. Most of us, even though we went through a course of training to become teachers, and then maybe we read the theory and then we find out in that process what the research indicates, it seems to be that we need to try out the different strategies that we learned and then put them into practice and then test their results. And then we decide whether we like them or not. So I'm not surprised at all by your answers. But I would like to invite you to think about more about how research can contribute to your teaching strategies. And so I would like to address this issue of how evidence from research could address your teaching by looking at 3 different areas. So I'm going to try to look at 3 different areas and 3 different results from research, from applied linguistics and from general education. So that's why number 3 comes as an important number in this presentation, okay? So we are going to focus, as I said, on 3 areas. You're going to see later how I'm going to focus or spend a lot more time on the last one, which is probably the one that you are most interested in. So I would like to organize this session in 3 main, I would say, statements. I would like to make a statement, and I would like to invite you to think about this statement and go with me in this presentation. First, evidence from research is valuable, and I'm going to try to discuss that and throughout the presentation as well. And second, evidence from research is valuable, but what are the problems that are associated with evidence from research, and then potentially how we can do what we can do about it. So that is why number 3 is evidence from research is valuable, but how? Okay, so valuable, but some tiny little problems. There are a lot more, but since I'm on a positive note, I just wanted to focus on 2, and then how to go about that evidence. Okay. Then evidence from research is valuable. This is a statement that I believe is important to make. Many people think, and I understand why, that research may not be relevant or valuable for them, but I believe it is, and I believe it is for these reasons. And this is my invitation. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. This is just an invitation for you to start seeing the potential value of this. First, evidence from research can nurture our practice with new informed ideas. Maybe your teaching does work very well. Maybe you know very well what to do. Maybe it is working, and maybe it is promoting learning. But then the question that sometimes we need to ask ourselves is, are we happy about what we are doing? Can we add more from what we are already doing for our students? And whether those more ideas or that additional information or innovation that we want to add to our teaching is really coming from places where there is evidence that they actually work, and they just not come from, I don't know, sharing information with others, and maybe it's not really grounded on any kind of on informed practice. Okay, so that's the first reason. The second reason is that evidence from research can help us confirm or reject beliefs about teaching. Sometimes we may have beliefs about teaching that come from a long time. Maybe that is the way we were taught as children. Maybe is the way we were trained at university. And what evidence that comes from research can do is actually help us confirm or reject something. Rejecting beliefs is very difficult. And it is difficult because we have had years of classroom experience, as you said, as most of you said, your sources of your decision-making comes from there. But it is important to give ourselves the opportunity to reject them with evidence. So that is what, this is an opportunity provided by research. And finally, the last point is that evidence from research can also trigger effective language learning experiences. If we know for sure that there are certain evidence that is indicating that something seems to be working well in other classrooms, why not try it out in our own classrooms, maybe adapt it, make it our own, and potentially promote effective learning. There is always a caveat of being very careful about how we are going to adapt new ideas, but the fact that they can become our own and use elements of that evidence is potentially prone to cause and promote effective learning. So those are 3 reasons that I think is important to keep in mind. Although you may, of course, question this at any time, but that is the invitation. Now, what are the problems that sometimes teachers indicate in terms of why research may be difficult or maybe ineffective or maybe, I don't know, distance from their teaching? There are many reasons, but 2 of the most common reasons mentioned is the fact that research evidence is sometimes irrelevant. Sometimes you people informed about research findings that have to do with things that are not connected to your practice, things that have nothing to do with what you do in the classroom, things that have nothing to do with how your students could improve in their learning, things that could help you with assessment or the development of your students' skills. And that is what makes it irrelevant, because what you want is to improve your students' learning. And if it's not achieving that, then it becomes irrelevant, it becomes useless in a way. Another problem is that sometimes, actually very commonly, evidence from research is very hard to access. And the reason for that is because they are behind a paywall. So not only it's difficult to access them because it's very difficult for you to get to certain places where interesting research evidence is, but also sometimes they are behind these papers that you have to pay to access. If you are able to access those papers, a second important issue or problem is to make sense of what it means, to even understand the language that you're using, because unfortunately, and this is a criticism for all of us who do research, we go a great lengths to try to make ourselves completely incomprehensible to teachers who are supposed to be the people to benefit from this information. And so I can understand that sometimes teachers may want to find out what is happening in research, but it's completely inaccessible. So that is the second common problem. So what can we do about that? If we try to think of solutions, way forward, how to make things better, what are different things that we can do to improve this situation? Well, first, try to always have easy access to evidence. Find a way to connect with some form of research that provides clear indication of how evidence has been collected. Again, because some of that information, it's so hard to find, is that there are sometimes people that are key in this process of trying to collect and find and be accessible to this information. And those people are called mediators. Mediators are either teacher trainers, teacher educators, mentors, sometimes even researchers themselves, or other people, colleagues that are interested in research that help create this bridge between teaching and the evidence that comes from research, okay? What they are doing is that they are bridging this gap, they are narrowing this gap in order to make sure that teachers get information that is relevant, that is accessible, that is significant, and that could actually promote effective learning. Unfortunately, mediators are not that many. I mean, if we think about people that have taken research and make it accessible to teachers, there are not that many people that do that. Teacher educators can develop that role, but it seems that we need more instances when this mediation happens. So my role in this presentation is try to do a little bit of the role of a mediator, okay? I'm not going to say that I'm going to do a perfect job. You will be the judge of that. Oh, that comes from a TV show. There's a TV show that says, I'll be the judge of that. So you will be the judge of my abilities as a mediator. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to present to you findings from research from 3 different areas in English language teaching and from 3 different areas in general education. Why I made this choice? Because there were findings that keep coming up in different papers about things being particularly significant, and also because I also noted that those are things that maybe we don't fully know about, and knowing about those things will provide a little bit more. A more solid foundation to our teaching. Some of those things I'm sure you know. You're going to be surprised with some of the things that I'm going to share, but it's just going to provide additional confirmation that what you were doing was probably right all along and you didn't have to change anything, okay? So first, I'm going to start with some findings from reading in English language teaching, okay? I feel like I've been talking for a long time, but in a webinar, there's no way around that. So, but I'm going to try to stop by asking you a question, okay? So that you can think about this. This is the question. In the case of reading for pleasure, not when you are reading to find words or to notice a grammar point. When you're reading for pleasure, let's say that you give your students a very short reading just for them to read and enjoy a very short, tiny story. How many words do you, person learning a second foreign language, you need to know in a text to be able to guess meaning from context? So how many of the words, content words, not function words such as the, of, how many content words do you need to know to be able to completely infer meaning? What do you think? So in Menti, again, go and click on the ME icon, and then the questions will be displayed, and start voting. What do you think is the percentage? I will give you time for you to answer the question. Okay, I'm already able to see some of the answers that are appearing on screen. I mean, some of your answers. I must say very few answers, though. Please take the time to provide the answers, because maybe you can turn the balance to one side. So your contributions are much appreciated. Okay, so the tendency goes to 80%. So most of you think that for students to be able to infer meaning in a text, they need to know 80% of the words. Okay, so let's see what the evidence from research is indicating. According to Paul Nation, who is a well-established researcher in the area of vocabulary in general, he indicates that you need to know, in average, 95% of the words, of the content words in a text, to be able to guess words in a text, to be able to infer the meaning of words in a text. Now, why I wanted to share this finding, because we have been led to believe for so long that students can just simply infer meaning just like that. They are going to be able to guess the meaning of the word just because there are words next to it that could help them understand. And actually, you need to know almost all the text and only miss one or two words for you to read for pleasure. Otherwise, you won't be reading for pleasure. You will be doing something called intensive reading, which is focusing on the vocabulary words, okay? So again, let's focus on the purpose of this. This is reading for pleasure, and for students to be able to just make sense of what the text is about, they need 95% of the text, which is probably explained why some of us non-native speakers read a book. We stop every certain time to get the meaning of a word, and that completely stops the fun of reading a text. And that is because we need to constantly know what each word means, okay? So that is one finding from research that has been widely spread. Let's now think about grammar. One finding, one piece of evidence that comes from the area of grammar in English language teaching that maybe we can get some information of. So this is a question. First, I'm going to describe the differences between the two types of grammar that I'm going to be talking about. Probably you have heard about these two ways of teaching grammar or covering grammar in your classrooms. One is explicit grammar teaching, another one is explicit grammar teaching. And whereas explicit grammar teaching involves the direct teaching of grammar, right? Telling them what it is, using a lot of metalinguistic terminology. For example, present tense use the gerund and uses have plus the past participle, and etc., etc. Those are metalinguistic terminology. And a lot of focus on the target language. So, for example, you will show them a sentence that uses that grammar structure, and you plan it ahead of time. So you know that you're teaching them about past tense, for example. You show them a text, you show them where the word is, and you explain to them how it is formed. Usually, a lot of the presentation is very formulaic, you know. You typically say something like pronoun plus verb in past plus adverb or whatever, or time. On the opposite side, you will have implicit grammar teaching, which involves the students acquiring the grammar meaning through a lot of input. So students, what they do is they are asked to pay attention to a certain text, to a certain structures that they are reading about or that is being presented to them, but there is no direct instruction or explanation of what that grammar is saying, or there is no direct explanation about what are the different terminologies around that grammar. You just present it to them and you hope that they, in a way, notice the grammar and kind of discovered a little bit what it means from all the input. So from those two, the question is, how do you teach grammar? That is a question that I would like to know the answer from, usually in the also using Menti. So if you can click on the Menti icon again. So to display the question, it's a very simple question. How do you teach grammar right now, mostly? Mostly, explicitly or implicitly? And I'm going to give you a few minutes for you to answer that question. And meanwhile, you answer, I'm going to drink a sip of water. It's almost a tie. Almost. Okay, thank you about that. I already noticed a trend. I don't think the trend is going to change at this point. So mainly explicitly, but followed closely by implicit grammar teaching. What is interesting about this, and this is where I'm going to go back in my slide a bit, is that what is interesting about this is that most of the times when we go to presentations, when they talk about how languages are learned and how people learn languages and how the communicative language teaching method works, and also about task-based learning, we usually are told that we should expose our students to a lot of input and allow them to discover language. That is what we are usually told. But interestingly enough, the research is indicating that explicit grammar instruction is more effective. Now, they're not saying that implicit grammar instruction does not work, but if there is a comparison between the two in terms of, if you teach the students in two different ways and then you evaluate and compare results, explicit grammar instruction is more effective. In simple and complex language features exposure and teaching, and it leads to better knowledge of the grammar, both implicit and implicitly. So in the longer term, it is actually better. So for those of you who teach grammar explicitly, well done, just continue doing it. Maybe you want to innovate with some implicit grammar teaching from time to time, but that is effective. And for those of you who have been told that implicit grammar instruction is better, actually you can now argue that research evidence indicates the opposite, okay? So moving on with vocabulary, another simple question about vocabulary and evidence that comes from research in vocabulary. I already showed you something that relates more to reading, but also connects with the work of Paul Nation in vocabulary. And here I'm going to show you another piece of evidence from Paul Nation. So this is the question. Which vocabulary words that appear here would you present together? Bed and sleep, pear and apple, fast and rapid, see and vision, dark and light. Which of the two would you present together? Please, from the Menti display, choose two options so that we will see which are the ones that seem to be have the most of answers. Okay, so which vocabulary words would you present together? Just choose two. I don't know, we could start displaying the answers. At least I don't see the answers. Okay, I can see them now. So you think bed and sleep, okay, associated words mainly, followed by pear and apple, and then the last one, which is dark and light. Okay, let's see if there is any change in the tendency here. No, I think it's becoming clear. Okay, so you think the first choice, what you would always be teaching together, is bed and sleep, are words that are associated, and then followed by words of the same category, pear and apple, so kind of semantic sets, and then finally opposites, you say. No, actually you say words closing meaning. We don't have opposites among the options, I've noticed. Do we? I'm not so sure. No, there is a repetition. I've noticed something in the Menti that I didn't notice before. There is a repetition in number 4 and 5. The choice is the same. It's see and vision. So I'm going to take these couple of seconds because I think it's important. Let's imagine, it doesn't matter the Menti. Let's imagine that, no, because you cannot go back now to answer. That's the problem. You cannot go back to answer. Okay, so never mind. But so for you to know, number 5, what's supposed to say opposites, dark and light, okay? But never mind. I was able to notice that there is a 19% of you who thinks that words closing meaning, Z and vision, need to be taught together, okay? That is clear. So let's move on to the results. The results indicate that words under the same category are the ones that the students have the most, the less difficulty learning and the less feelings of interference. Because what sometimes happens is that they get confused when they learn 2 words together. What research is indicating is that in most cases, students have they have a much better chance of remembering the 2 words that are under the same category, which is in a way good that most textbooks that you probably are using are doing that. They are teaching vocabulary in these semantic sets. Second would be words closing meaning, see and vision. So you were right because you also chose that as another option. And then in number 3, which is the one that you couldn't see, were opposites, dark and light. And then the near synonyms, such as fast and rapid, actually confuse the students. And this is what research says, that when you are teaching vocabulary, if you think that there are 2 words that are causing interference, when it's in the case of fast and rapid, just simply teach them at different times. And ideally, if you're going to present items that collocate, try to present those 2 words together. For example, hot collocates with beach, water, summer, ice cream. Now I'm thinking about ice cream. And then cold could be used with things such as morning, coffee, and drink. Okay, so that is another way that you could also teach vocabulary close together with collocates, words that collocate. Then to continue, I'm going to try now to focus on general education research. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster because we are running out of time and I don't want to leave very little time for questions, but I think we are okay so far. So again, 3 pieces of information that come from research. Here I'm going to use one massive set of data that comes from the work of Hattie, John Hattie. You have probably heard about him. What he has done this meta-analysis that collects different research carried out in the area of education. And what he has done is put all this different research together, and he has giving them a number of how effective they are. So if the research says there is a strong correlation of learning with this type of teaching strategy, Hattie and his team have given them a certain, what they call size effect factor, okay? So based on that, he has designed all this ranking of different strategies, not only strategies, but also situations, aspects of teaching and learning that could be an indicator of effective learning, okay? So in this time, what I would like to focus on is on teaching strategies specifically, and look at what are those teaching strategies specifically that seem to have a very high effect, a positive effect in learning, okay? So I'm going to ask you again to use the Menti question to answer the following. Which of these 6 teaching strategies would you think are the most effective? I'm going to explain to them in detail in a minute, but just as a summary, inductive teaching is simply teaching where students discover. It's not a lot of teaching, direct teaching going on, very similar to the idea of explicit and implicit. So this is the opposite of deductive. Students discover knowledge. Reciprocal teaching has to do with the students teaching each other, okay, based on following a model. Jigsaw method is this idea about the students, again, teaching each other in groups of 4 people. 4 response clickers in when the students provide answers using, clickers, such as Kahoot, for example. Background music, when you play background music in the classroom for your students to be more focused and concentrated. And then success criteria is very similar to a rubric, when you provide the students a set of criteria for them to follow when they do a task. So choose the 2 that you think are the most effective. And you are already voting, which is great. Okay, so I do not see very well, but it seems to be that reciprocal teaching, you think it's very effective, followed by inductive teaching. Okay, so reciprocal teaching, very high, followed by inductive teaching, followed by, there is a fight there between success criteria and Jigsaw method. Okay, I can see that. So definitely number 2, which is reciprocal teaching, seems to be the one that you think is highly effective, followed by inductive teaching and then success criteria. Okay. Well, you are not that far off. You're actually very close to what the evidence indicates. The evidence indicates that the most effective strategy from the ones studied, and especially from these ones that I've mentioned, is the Jigsaw method, followed by success criteria, which was among your top choices, and then followed by reciprocal teaching, and then a little bit further down, inductive teaching, which is interesting because it's also showing, along with grammar, how important it is direct teaching, explicit teaching, and then response clickers that have been in fashion because the students seem to love them, but they're not seem to indicate any actual effective role in learning. And then finally, background music. And I think you were about right in those ones. So just to show very quickly, I want to show you just the three most important methods in case some of you didn't know them. The Jigsaw method is this method where we have our class divided into groups. So let's say we have, in our class, we have different groups, and in each group we have 4 students. So what we do is we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we give them a task to all students that are group number 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, all students number 1 come to this corner of the room or to this area. All students number 2 go to this area of the room. Number 3 is over there, number 4 over there. What you do is you give them a little piece of paper to read. It could be a part of a story. It could be part of a text. It could be a vocabulary word. It could be anything. And what they do is they read it very well. They try to understand it. They make sense of it. They give each other examples, they help each other, and then they go back to the original groups. And when they go back to the original groups, they teach each other and they report on the discussion. Okay, that is Jigsaw. Why it's supposed to be effective? Because it's providing an opportunity for students to own their learning, to become more aware of what it is that they are learning, and to be able to explain others. And when you have this idea of having to explain again what you have learned to other people, you seem to internalize it better. So that is why Jigsaw is a very good, effective strategy. The other one that I wanted to tell you about is called reciprocal teaching. That is a strategy that is specifically being used for reading, but it doesn't have to be extensive reading. It could be short pieces of text. And what it allows is the students, again, to take ownership of their own learning, by students, again, being divided by 4 and then being able to make sense of what it is that they're reading. The strategy is organized under a key idea that is called the FAB4. And what the FAB4 are about are the students divided in 4 groups having a very specific role. One is a predictor. So students are giving a text, they read it, and one student predicts what is the learning that they're going to get out of that, what they think can be done with that text that they read, or what could be that the teacher is going to continue doing later. So it's a general prediction. A student is a questioner, asks questions about the text that could be shared. Another student is a summarizer, make sure they summarize the key information from the text. And another student is a clarifier. So things that may not be clear, some vocabulary words, some structure, some ideas that may not be clear, it's the role of that student to do that. So they are all working together as one group, all of them having a different role. Now, if some of you are wondering whether they need to have a high level of language, it all depends on the text. The text could be very simple. It could be a very short story of for example, a description of somebody's body or clothes, and that would be enough for them to be able to read and work together. That is also another very effective strategy. And then finally, something that I think you are mostly familiar with is success criteria. It's based on this notion of the importance of formative assessment, the importance of feedback. And success criteria involves asking students, for example, to do a task. In this case, I just provided an example, to write a formal email, and then find ways in which you can collect feedback. And the feedback is for the students to be able to know what is expected of them when they're writing, for example, the email. So what you would do is you would give them something like this with a learning intention. What is the learning intention? Write a formal email requesting a business meeting. And you would give them the different criterion that should be included in this email that they're going to write. And if you notice, it's very specific. Greet the recipient, state who the writer is, explain the reason for writing. So probably what usually happens is that you provide a model. And a model is quite effective. But more than a model, provide these so that the students can then kind of cross-check whether they have all the important components of the email that could provide them information for them to know that they're going to be successful in the task. This is one form of collecting information for your students to collect information about how well they are doing. And this, again, is highly effective according to general education research evidence. Okay? So again, going back to my initial statement about why evidence from research is valuable, because it can nurture our practices with new ideas. Potentially, I don't know, some of the ideas that I explained here are things that you didn't know about. Also, it allows you to confirm or reject beliefs. So probably many of you thought that students were able to understand a text for pleasure with just 80% of the words being known, and now you know that it's 95%, so it could reject your beliefs. You can confirm that explicit grammar teaching is quite effective, for example, and it can trigger effective language learning experiences in the case that you want to try, for example, the Jigsaw method in your class and see how that could help your students, okay? So again, all of this is quite valuable if we have the opportunity to have mediators that could help us in this role of having access to valuable, relevant pieces of evidence from research that we could see an immediate effect on our practice. So what I try to do is try to find examples of teaching strategies that are based on research quite effective, and that you could find interesting and important for you to adopt in your teaching. So the role of mediators is important here. So not only teachers having access to that information, but mediators that help them be able to have access to this information is key. So again, I share with you 3 pieces of research from general education and from English language teaching, but always it's important to remember that even though the evidence and the theory that could come from that evidence is very important, they shouldn't dictate our practice. Always be aware that you can question everything that you are provided, that you are informed with in terms of evidence of research, and just take it, adopt it, try it out, see how it works for you. So that's why they always say adapt rather than adopt. So test it out and see how it works for your classroom, because ideally you should need to be the ones judging whether it actually works for you, which is always the message that I leave for people, is the importance of teachers rather be consumers of research, maybe becoming researchers themselves. So if you can have the opportunity to test whether any of these pieces of evidence or strategies actually work for you in your context, why don't you do a tiny little piece of research and see whether it actually works, and you can share it with your colleagues, and then it will provide a much clearer evidence that it actually works in your context, in your reality. On that note, I'm just going to leave you here with the references, so for you to check whenever you have the time. And final message that I wanted to give to you is for you to become more empowered and an agent of your own teaching. Is not to always consume what other people do, but it ideally also become more involved in what you do in your classroom, since I feel we have left for too long many people to decide what we do in our classroom. And as Donald Freeman well said, maybe it is time for us to start becoming more involved. So I've tried to share with you some pieces of research that I think could be interesting for you to use in your practice. The references are there for you to have access to the different papers or resources that could be available from that research. And if you have any question, maybe you can share it with us now. I think Yen is going to come up now with to share with us some of your questions. I need to wait for the 10
Yeah,
can delay.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can, Yen.
Okay, well, there are a couple of questions. I would like to pick some of them. And Ariana Malan, she asks about where were those strategies measured in terms of the ones that you were mentioning?
The strategies that were mentioned by the John Hattie report?
I think so.
Okay. What John Hattie did is he collected research papers from different countries in different contexts. And so it's not just one research, 2 pieces of research, it's a collection of everything on the role of those different teaching strategies for the effect that they could have in promoting learning. And based on that, they decided to give, let's say in very simple language, points to how effective they seem to be based on that research. Now, I would question whether they have been applied in a context with, I don't know, 40 students, 50 students. And so that is why I wonder whether that would be the same case in bigger, large classes, which is something that I question myself. But I know that it's a massive meta-analysis that is looking at research carried out in a number of different contexts.
Okay, thank you. Well, Claudia Gurto, she asked for more information about the Jigsaw Method. If you can.
The Jigsaw Method. The Jigsaw Method is my favorite. I use it a lot. I would advise to go into internet and search for Jigsaw Method. Now that you know that it's considered to be highly effective, you can Google and you can find information. But what I like about the Jigsaw Method is that you can use it for practically anything. So let's say you are going to teach today you have a plan of teaching 6 different words to students. Maybe it's going to take a long time to do this process, instead of you saying word number 1 is this, word number 2 is this, word number 3 is this other. If you give them just these words to the students in different groups, and they make out the meaning of those words, and they could make out examples, sentences of those words, trust me, that is going to stay with them for longer than if we just mention those words. It's simply because they had to explain it to each other that they remember it. They remember those words so vividly, and that is what makes it effective. But it's simply organizing your class in groups, then counting 1, 2, 3, 4, splitting number 1s, number 2s, number 3s, number 4s, and to the different groups you give them something specific to each different set of expert groups that they're called. Then when they go back to the original group, their home groups that they're called, they explain the information that they learned to the members of the original groups. And that is why it becomes so effective, because they're learning from each other.
Perfect, thank you. And our final question comes from Jaime Benavides. He asks, could you please be more precise about the term do research? I understand you don't mean to publish necessarily, but something that fits your own practices.
What term, sorry?
Research, do research. You can expand it more.
Well, when you connect, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Jaime, but maybe you can let me know in the chat if Yen can see it, and maybe I could explain to you later. But when you talk about research and teaching, usually people talk about 2 different things. One is reading research, and another one is doing research. When you read research, it's potentially very effective because you read about what has been considered to be informed practice that has been tested as effective. And as I say, can nurture your teaching, you can confirm or reject beliefs, and it could provide new ideas to your classroom. But another thing is to actually do research by yourself. If you do research that is your own, what you end up doing is it's like similar to this idea of jigsaw reading or reciprocal teaching. You become the owner of your own results, and you start to own the knowledge that you gain from that process. So let's say jigsaw. Everybody thinks jigsaw. Everybody it's a overstatement, but let's say everybody thinks jigsaw is quite effective. Take it into your classroom, try it out, and test what happens. You can try it with one group, not trying with another group, and then see what the results are telling you, and what is the final result there. The idea of teachers doing research is to move a step beyond teachers being consumers of research carried out by others into actually being producers of knowledge. So if you realize that jigsaw works in your classroom when you teach A, B, and C, but not D, and E, what you do is you share it with your colleagues, and then the information that you're sharing is a lot more practical, relevant, and useful, because it's things that you tried out in a context that is similar to those of your colleagues.
Okay, thank you. And the last pick, there is one question here, because we have only 5 minutes left. So, Valentina Almendra, is there any evidence from teaching in the Chilean reality we can look into?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Valentina. There is an archive. RISELT has an archive of, I'm not going to be able to say all, but probably most of the research carried out in the past, 10 years. In that archive, what we have is we have a collection of the different research carried out by Chilean researchers in the Chilean context. And so there are things that have been published, 15 years ago, and there are things that have been published this year, and that is all there. It's organized, and if you want to check for let's say, I know there has been a lot of research carried out in the area of motivation, for example. You look for motivation, and a number of articles that are focusing on that area and that are looking at motivation in the Chilean classroom will come up there. And you can then access the journal based on the reference that is indicated. So that information likely is accessible in the RISELT website.
Okay, thank you very much, Paula, for such insightful talk and for providing us with a wider perspective of how evidence and teaching should coexist and work together. Thank you very much to all the teachers that took part and participated actively on this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being there.
Yes. And we would like to invite you to our next virtual event, which will take place next Thursday, 23rd of July at 5 p.m., same channel, same stream, titled Making Possible What Seems Impossible, Turning Your Remote Learning Handouts Work by Rodrigo Arias. Thank you again, Paula. And before you leave the virtual room, I would like to ask you to all the attendees to fill out a short survey that is found in the live comments for helping us improve our future events. Okay? So thank you very much and have a wonderful evening. And let's keep in touch. Please fill out the form. It is at the very bottom. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Licinia.
Bye.